The Galactic Dominion had always viewed humanity as little more than an annoyance, an upstart species that had expanded too quickly into territories it had no right to claim. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of civilizations over the centuries, assimilating them into its vast empire, reducing their worlds to obedient vassal states, or if necessary, burning them to cinders. When humanity emerged on the galactic stage, it was not seen as a threat, it was seen as an inconvenience. For years, the Dominion's High Council debated the issue of human expansion. Some of its members argued that Earth and its colonies should be brought into the fold through diplomacy, allowing them to serve under the Dominion's rule as lesser beings. Others believed that allowing humans to exist at all was an insult to the galactic hierarchy. After all, they were Death-Worlders, creatures born from a planet so hostile that its natural evolution had sculpted them into survivors beyond reason. The idea of letting such a species grow unchecked was madness. The decision, when it finally came, was simple. Humanity would be eradicated before it became a true threat. The attack came without warning. At exactly 6 Earth Standard Time, every major city across the planet was struck simultaneously. The skies burned as Dominion warships hovered in high orbit, releasing energy pulses that reduced buildings to molten slag within seconds. From New York to Beijing, from Moscow to Sao Paulo, firestorms consumed the skyline, skyscrapers collapsing as millions perished in an instant. Dockyards were devastated. The Texans were known to dig up an engine perished in an instant. The oceans boiled where the blasts touched the surface, sending tsunamis rippling outward, swallowing entire coastal regions. In orbit, Dominion High Admiral Varric observed the devastation from the bridge of his flagship, Tyrannus, his expression unreadable. He had commanded dozens of planetary purges in his lifetime, but there was something about this particular mission that felt different. Perhaps it was the way the humans had failed to react. Every other species that had faced the Dominion's wrath had responded with immediate, frantic distress signals, begging for mercy, pleading for terms, crying out in terror. But the humans? Nothing. No transmissions, no desperate attempts at negotiation. The planet's networks had gone dark within moments of the first strike, and the Dominion's tactical analysts struggled to determine whether it was a result of infrastructure failure or a deliberate act. Civilian evacuation shuttles launched from some of the remaining cities, but not as many as expected. No grand military counteroffensive came. No declaration of surrender or defiance. Varric turned to his second-in-command, an officer who had served under him for decades. "Why are they silent?" he asked, his voice a low growl. The officer hesitated before responding. "We do not know, Admiral. We intercepted a few encrypted transmissions before their communication network collapsed, but nothing decipherable. No distress calls, no centralized commands. It's odd." Varric narrowed his eyes. Odd was not a word he enjoyed hearing in a military operation. "Continue bombardment," he ordered. "Ensure complete planetary devastation. If their silence is some kind of trick, we will drown it in fire." Below, the onslaught continued. Waves of plasma fire rained down, reducing what had once been thriving metropolises into endless fields of glowing embers. The sheer magnitude of destruction was incomprehensible. The Dominion had razed planets before, but humanity's homeworld was more than just another colony. It was a cradle of innovation, an engine of war and resilience that had, for centuries, defined the species. And now it was burning. By midday, satellites orbiting Earth had been disabled, severing all off-world communication. Whatever remained of humanity's governments had either gone underground or ceased to exist entirely. Dominion ground forces stood by, awaiting orders to land and eliminate any survivors. The operation was proceeding flawlessly. But Varric still felt uneasy. Even as his officers reported success after success, even as his warships swept across the planet unchallenged, something gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He had expected resistance. He had expected chaos. Instead, There was nothing. The humans were not fighting back, or at least not yet. As the Dominion fleet continued its relentless assault, buried deep beneath the ruins of what had once been Geneva, the last remnants of Earth's military command gathered in an underground war room. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the scent of burning circuitry filling the dimly lit chamber. Generals and strategists stood around a central holographic display, their faces grim. They had known this day would come. They had prepared for it. At the head of the table stood General Elias Carter, a man whose entire career had been built on preparing for a war that most of humanity had refused to believe was inevitable. He had spent years arguing with politicians, warning them that peace was an illusion in a galaxy ruled by conquest. He had begged for funding to build Earth's defenses, for authorization to develop weapons that could stand against an empire that saw them as insects. He had been ignored. Now, as the ground trembled with the force of another orbital strike, he knew that they had run out of time. The enemy was here. The enemy had come for everything. He turned to his officers, his voice steady despite the chaos above. "Activate Protocol Ragnarok." A ripple of tension passed through the room. No one spoke. No one questioned the order. They had all known, from the moment the first Dominion warship had entered Earth's orbit, that this was their only option. The plan had been in place for decades, buried beneath layers of classified security measures, waiting for the day when diplomacy would... One of the officers, a young woman with sharp eyes and a steady hand, reached for the console in front of her. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before pressing the activation code. A deep, resonating hum filled the chamber as hidden defense systems across the planet roared to life. In orbit, Varick's unease deepened as his sensors detected an anomaly. Hundreds of dormant satellites, previously thought to be offline, suddenly activated in unison. Energy signatures spiked across the planet. Weapons systems that should have been destroyed by the initial bombardment came online, their targeting arrays locking onto Dominion warships. The artificial intelligence networks that had gone dark mere hours ago flickered back to life, their programming adapting in real time to the enemy's strategies. And then, for the first time since the attack had begun, a single transmission was broadcast across all Dominion channels. A human voice, calm and unwavering. "You bombed us? Adorable. Watch this." The Dominion fleet had just made the worst mistake in its history. General Elias Carter stood motionless in the underground command center, his gaze locked on the holographic display before him. The flickering blue light cast sharp shadows across his face, accentuating the hard lines carved by years of war planning. Around him, officers and strategists moved with purpose, their hands flying over consoles as encrypted commands surged through Earth's last remaining military networks. There was no room for fear here, only precision, calculation, and the cold efficiency of a species preparing to avenge its dead. The activation of Protocol Ragnarok had set into motion a sequence of events that had been meticulously crafted over decades. Deep within the Earth's crust, silos that had remained dormant for generations rumbled to life, their warheads priming for launch. Spaceports buried beneath Arctic ice sheets opened their reinforced blast doors, revealing long-range interceptors that had been built in secrecy, away from the prying eyes of Dominion intelligence. Across every remaining human colony, the same signal was received. The message was simple. The war's not over. The war has just begun. Carter's voice was calm as he addressed his staff. "Deploy the Ghost Fleet." A young officer turned to him, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "Sir, are we certain? If we do this, there is no going back." Carter didn't flinch. There was never a way back. The officer swallowed hard, then nodded before relaying the command. In the depths of the Kuiper Belt, beyond the orbit of Neptune, an array of warships stirred from their slumber. These were no ordinary vessels. They had been built in the shadows, hidden from Dominion scanners, their hulls coated in non-reflective materials that absorbed nearly all forms of detection. Each ship had been programmed to remain in a passive state until Protocol Ragnarok was engaged. Now, their systems roared to life, engines flaring with silent fury as they turned toward the Dominion fleet. But Carter knew that firepower alone wouldn't be enough. The Dominion was an empire built on war. Their technology surpassed human capabilities in many ways, and their fleets had overwhelmed species far older and more advanced than Earth. A direct confrontation, even with Earth's hidden forces, would be suicide. This war could not be won with brute strength alone. It had to be won with intellect, deception, and psychological warfare. He turned to another officer, a woman with short black hair and the cold, calculating eyes of a strategist who had seen too many battles. Initiate the dead hand protocol. She inclined her head, fingers dancing over the interface in front of her. Within moments, an encrypted signal pulsed through human space, traveling faster than any Dominion scout could intercept. Its purpose was singular: to inform every surviving human colony that the time had come for retribution. Across the galaxy, humans who had spent their lives hiding in the Dominion's shadow received their orders. Some were embedded within the Dominion's own military, their presence unnoticed by their alien commanders. Others operated as merchants, engineers, or even slaves in the heart of enemy territory. Every single one of them had been waiting for this moment. The response was immediate. On Xanthora Prime, a Dominion industrial hub responsible for manufacturing warships, a human engineer calmly walked into a restricted maintenance sector. He carried a simple device, small, unassuming, easily mistaken for a standard repair tool. He placed it against the primary reactor core, turned the dial, and walked away. 3 minutes later, the entire station erupted into a fireball so massive that debris rained down onto the planet's surface. On Vorkai 9, a Dominion supply depot, a human pilot who had spent years hauling cargo for his alien overlords suddenly veered off course. His freighter, packed with high-yield explosives, slammed into the orbital platform, triggering a chain reaction that wiped out half the Dominion's logistics network in the sector. On Belrith 6, a high-ranking Dominion official overseeing the war effort collapsed during a strategy meeting. The alien security team rushed to his aid, but it was already too late. The poison, carefully introduced into his food days earlier by his human chef, had no antidote. The Dominion was crumbling from within before its leaders even realized they were at war. Meanwhile, Carter's plan moved into its next phase. The Dominion fleet still hovered over Earth, their commanders believing that victory had already been secured. But the truth was far from it. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its ships or its soldiers. It had always been its unpredictability. From hidden launch sites, high-orbit drones were deployed, each carrying a payload designed for one purpose: to blind the Dominion's surveillance systems. Within moments, the alien fleet's sensors were overwhelmed with false signals, decoys mimicking human warships appearing on every scanner. The Dominion admirals, caught off guard, scrambled to reposition their forces. And then the real attack began from the depths of the ocean. Human submarines, modified to function in both water and vacuum, breached the surface, launching swarms of hypersonic missiles directly into the heart of the Dominion fleet. Warships that had once seemed invincible were suddenly torn apart, their shields overloaded, their hulls shattered. Explosions rippled through the formation, leaving chaos in their wake. The flagship Tyrannus, which had once presided over Earth's destruction, was struck by multiple projectiles. The Dominion's flagship AI frantically attempted to compensate, but the sheer volume of human countermeasures was too much. Fires raged across the ship's decks, emergency sirens blaring as crew members struggled to maintain control. Admiral Varrock stood on the bridge, his normally composed demeanor cracking as he watched his forces being dismantled before his very eyes. This was impossible. This was not how the script was supposed to play out. Humanity was supposed to be broken, cowering in submission. Instead, it was fighting back with a ruthlessness that defied all logic. A message came through his personal communicator, its origin unknown. When he opened the transmission, a single voice spoke. calm, cold, and laced with quiet amusement. You thought you could break us? Cute. But now, Admiral, it's our turn. And then the true horror of what he had unleashed began to dawn on him. Humanity wasn't just surviving, it was hunting. Admiral Varrock gripped the edges of the tactical console, his claws digging into the polished metal as alarms blared across the bridge of Tyrannus. The battle was slipping from his control. The humans, those primitive, irrational creatures, were striking with a level of coordination and brutality that defied every prediction. His fleet, the Dominion's most powerful armada, was supposed to reduce them to ashes. Instead, it was bleeding, hemorrhaging ships as explosions rippled through its once flawless formation. He turned toward his second-in-command, whose pale blue skin had darkened with stress. "Status report," he barked. The officer barely concealed his panic. "Admiral, we've lost 22 capital ships and over 100 interceptors. Their countermeasures have crippled our targeting systems. We are detecting multiple human assault waves, but we cannot determine which are real and which are decoys." Varrick's mandibles clicked in frustration. Deception. Misdirection. No species had ever dared use such tactics against the Dominion on this scale. He had spent his career commanding overwhelming force, crushing resistance before it had the chance to grow. The humans, however, fought like predators, waiting, watching, and then striking with surgical. A deep rumble shook the ship. Emergency sirens shrieked as power flickered. One of the junior officers turned in alarm. "Shields are failing. Hull integrity at 72% and dropping." Varrick's mind raced. He needed time to reorganize the fleet, but the humans weren't giving him any. They were exploiting every weakness, finding gaps in his defenses before he even knew they existed. A pattern was emerging, a terrifying one. Humanity was not just retaliating, it was studying them. Another explosion sent a shockwave through the bridge, and the lights flickered violently before stabilizing. The Dominion flagship had never taken this much damage in a single engagement. This was supposed to be a massacre, not a war. A transmission request flashed on the main screen. It came from an unknown source, encrypted with a level of sophistication that suggested deep military intelligence. Varrick hesitated. No human had ever contacted a Dominion fleet mid-battle. It was unheard of. He gestured for the transmission to be accepted. The screen came to life, revealing a man with sharp, unyielding eyes. His uniform bore the insignia of Earth's military command, but there was no arrogance in his expression, only certainty. "Admiral Varrick," the man said, his voice as steady as if he were discussing the weather. "This is General Elias Carter of Earth's Unified Command. You have made a critical mistake." Varrick narrowed his eyes, his mandibles twitching. "You are mistaken, human. Your world is lost. Your species is doomed. This resistance is futile." Carter's lips curled slightly, but there was no humor in it. "Do you believe that? Truly?" He leaned slightly forward. "Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time you fought an enemy that enjoyed war?" A silence settled over the bridge. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that seeped into every Dominion officer present. Carter continued, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You think we are fighting for survival. You're wrong. We are fighting because you made the mistake of thinking we wouldn't. You assumed that we would crumble, but humanity doesn't break, Admiral. It adapts. It learns. And you just became our best teacher." Varrick refused to show weakness, but deep inside something cold settled in his chest. He had read reports about human warfare, but he had dismissed them as exaggerated accounts of primitive savagery. Now he was beginning to understand the humans had not fought their hardest battles against alien invaders. They had fought each other, for centuries. They had perfected war long before the Dominion even knew they existed. Carter tilted his head slightly. "Let me give you one last chance. Withdraw now, and we will allow your survivors to return home." Varrick stiffened. The audacity of the offer was infuriating. A lesser commander might have taken it, but he would not. The Dominion did not surrender, It did not retreat. He straightened, his voice regaining its edge. "You do not understand the power you face, human. Your resistance is nothing more than the last screams of a dying species. We will burn your worlds to dust, and history will forget you ever existed." Carter sighed, as if he had expected the answer. "I was hoping you'd say that." The transmission cut off. Varric barely had time to react before a new alarm sounded. A Dominion officer spun toward him, his voice filled with dread. "Admiral, we are detecting multiple warp signatures inbound, dozens, no, hundreds. They're emerging from subspace all around us." Varric's breath caught. That was impossible. Humanity didn't have that many warships. Their fleet had been counted, analyzed, predicted. Then the realization hit him. The Ghost Fleet, human warships that had never been recorded in Dominion databases, surged into real space like shadows emerging from the void. Their hulls were black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They had no standardized shape, no identifiable insignia, just weapons. So many weapons, and they were already firing. The first Dominion dreadnought erupted into flames before its crew even had time to react. The second was severed clean in half, its engines detonating in a chain reaction that sent debris spiraling toward nearby cruisers. Within moments, the tide of battle had shifted. The Dominion fleet, once a symbol of unparalleled dominance, was being torn apart by a force that had seemingly materialized from the darkness. Varric clenched his fists. He could not, would not allow this. "Redirect all power to weapons," he roared. "I want those ships destroyed." His officers scrambled to comply, but the chaos was too great. The Ghost Fleet moved with terrifying precision, exploiting every weakness in Dominion formations. The humans were not just attacking, they were erasing the fleet, ship by ship. And then the worst happened. A seismic explosion rippled through Tyrannus, knocking Varric off his feet. The main display flickered, revealing a catastrophic hull breach on the lower decks. Fires raged. Security reports flooded in. Critical damage, systems failing, reactor containment at risk. Another alarm shrieked. This one was different, more chilling. It was an intruder alert. Varric's blood ran cold. Humans had boarded his flagship. The impossible had happened. He gritted his teeth, pulling himself up, his rage burning brighter than the flames consuming his fleet. If the humans wanted war, then he would give them one, even if it meant fighting them himself. Admiral Varric steadied himself against the flickering control console as another explosion rocked the Tyrannus. The emergency lights painted the bridge in deep red hues, their flickering glow barely illuminating the frantic Dominion officers scrambling to re-establish control. The Ghost Fleet had shattered his formation, but the worst had come in the last few moments. Humans had boarded his flagship. The intruder alert blared through the ship, a chilling confirmation that the enemy was no longer just beyond his hull, but inside it. He turned to his tactical officer, whose pale skin was damp with fear. "Status on the containment teams." The officer's fingers trembled over the console as he checked the security feeds. "Human forces have breached decks 7 through 10. We lost communication with the security squads within 2 minutes of engagement. They are moving fast, Admiral. Too fast." Varric clenched his mandibles. He had seen countless battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. He had always assumed that humanity's greatest weapon was its resilience, its ability to withstand devastation. But now, as he watched his fleet crumble and his own ship fall into chaos, he realized his mistake. Their true strength wasn't just in endurance, it was in their adaptability. They weren't merely surviving, they were evolving mid-battle. The bridge doors hissed open, and a high-ranking Dominion strategist stumbled inside, his armor scorched and cracked. Blood dripped from a deep wound along his side, but he barely seemed to notice as he staggered toward the Admiral. "We must evacuate, Admiral. The humans, they are unlike any enemy we have faced." Varric refused to acknowledge the suggestion. "We do not abandon our ships. The strategist inhaled sharply. Then you do not understand what we are facing. I fought against them in the lower decks. They are not fighting for survival. They are hunting. The words sent a chill through the officers. Before Varric could respond, the holographic display flickered to life, cutting through the chaos of the bridge. At first, he assumed it was another distress signal from one of the failing Dominion vessels, but as the image sharpened, he realized what it was. A human transmission. It was broadcasting across every Dominion military frequency, overriding secure channels, playing not just on his ship, but everywhere. The figure that appeared on the screen was familiar. General Elias Carter. The human leader was seated in a command center, his expression impassive, the golden insignia of Earth's unified command gleaming on his uniform. The lighting was dim, casting deep shadows over his features, but his eyes burned with unmistakable intensity. He did not look like a man negotiating. He looked like a man delivering a death sentence. "Citizens of the Dominion," Carter's voice carried through every ship, every occupied world, every Dominion-held station. Your leaders made a grave miscalculation. They believed humanity was weak, that we would kneel, that we would fade into history as another species crushed under their empire. Varric's fists tightened. He wanted to shut off the transmission, but it was already too late. The entire galaxy was watching. Carter continued. You bombed our cities. You burned our homes. You took millions of lives in a single day, believing that fear would break us. His lips curled in something that resembled a smile, but there was no warmth in it. But you did not understand who we are. You did not understand what happens when you push humanity too far. The screen changed, cutting to footage that had no doubt been recorded in real time. It showed the burning wreckage of the Dominion's warships, the shattered remains of the once invincible fleet. It showed Dominion officers, once proud, now terrified, being pulled from the wreckage of their own capital ships by human soldiers in armored exosuits. Then the screen cut again, to Dominion worlds, to Zenthara Prime, where human saboteurs had reduced entire factories to craters, to Vorkai 9, where Dominion soldiers scrambled in disarray, desperately trying to recover from the catastrophic attack on their supply chains, to Balrith 6, where Dominion leadership was in free fall after the assassination of key commanders. It was not just a battle, it was a systematic dismantling of everything the Dominion had built. Carter's voice returned. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Every Dominion-controlled planet, every ship, every station, you will face what you have done. For every life you took, we will take 10. For every city you burned, we will burn 100. You started this war. We will end it. The screen shifted one last time, and this time the image made even Varroc's cold-blooded heart stop. It was the Dominion's homeworld. A fleet loomed above it. Not the remnants of Earth's shattered defenses, not a desperate counterattack, a full-scale invasion force. Hundreds of ships, all human, all armed with weapons that should have been far beyond their technological capabilities. Carter had not simply recovered from the attack on Earth, he had planned for this retaliation long before the first bomb fell. The transmission zoomed in on the planet's surface, where the Dominion's High Council chamber stood. The massive structure had housed the most powerful leaders of the Empire for centuries. It was a symbol of dominance, of control. Now it was burning. Massive firestorms engulfed the skyline. Human dropships descended, their silhouettes barely visible through the smoke. The High Council, those who had orchestrated the destruction of Earth, were no longer in power. They were dead. Carter's face returned to the screen. "We do not want your surrender," he said, his voice low and lethal. "We want your extinction." And then the transmission cut out. The bridge of the Tyrannus was silent. Even the officers who had been desperately trying to regain control had frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Varroc stared at the blank screen, his mind reeling. Everything had been turned against them. He had spent his career ensuring that the Dominion remained unmatched in war, Now he was watching it unravel. A Dominion officer finally broke the silence. His voice was hoarse. "Admiral? What do we do?" Varric turned, his eyes burning with something deeper than rage, defiance. "We fight," he growled, "even if it meant fighting to the last breath." Admiral Varric stood at the shattered viewport of the Tyrannus, his mandibles tightening as he watched the remnants of his once glorious fleet burning in the cold void of space. Debris from Dominion warships floated aimlessly, some still flickering with dying energy signatures, others reduced to nothing more than silent husks. Human warships prowled between them, hunting down any survivors, ensuring no escape. The battle had not simply been lost. It had been a massacre. Behind them, the bridge was a graveyard. Consoles sparked, warning sirens howled their final protests, and Dominion officers lay slumped over their stations, some dead, others wounded beyond saving. Blood pooled at the base of the command chair, seeping into the cracks of the metal flooring. Those who still lived stood frozen, their expressions hollow, as if they were struggling to comprehend the scale of their defeat. A voice crackled through the shattered communication array. "Human. Admiral Varric?" General Elias Carter's voice was calm, controlled, but carrying the weight of inevitability. "Your fleet is gone. Your empire is falling. There is no future for the Dominion." Varric turned, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the flickering hollow display. Carter's face was illuminated by the glow of his own command center, where the emblem of Earth's unified command shimmered behind him. The human general's expression was unreadable, but there was no mockery, no arrogance. Just the cold certainty of a man who knew he had already won. Varric refused to kneel. He would never beg. He straightened his spine, lifting his chin despite the blood smeared across his uniform. "You assume that I will surrender," he growled. "You assume that I will accept extinction." Carter did not blink. "No," he said. "I assume you will die." Varric bared his fangs in defiance. "Then I will die as a warrior." Carter leaned forward slightly, his eyes like steel. "You think this is about you. Your death means nothing. Your empire is over. This war is already won." He exhaled as if tired of the conversation. "Your High Council is dead. Your fleets are destroyed. Every Dominion world is under siege. You may die fighting, Admiral, but the only thing you will accomplish is making your species' extinction absolute." "Human." Varric's claws dug into the console. He knew Carter was right. He had felt the weight of inevitability pressing against him from the moment humanity had struck back. The Dominion had built its empire on the belief that it was unchallenged, that no species could rise against its might. That arrogance had blinded them, had kept them from seeing the truth until it was too late. Humanity had never fought for survival. It had fought for conquest. The Dominion had not started a war. It had invited an execution. And now, the executioner had arrived. A new alarm pulsed through the ruined bridge, followed by the desperate voice of the surviving tactical officer. "Admiral, human forces have breached the hull. Deck 14 is collapsing. We have intruders on multiple levels. The reactors are failing." Varric turned toward the officer, his mandibles clicking once. He had no words left. There was nothing to say. The officer, sensing the finality in his silence, simply lowered his head. There was no longer a battle to fight, only an ending to accept. The bridge doors burst open. Human soldiers in armored exosuits stormed inside, their weapons raised, their visors gleaming with cold efficiency. They moved with lethal precision, spreading out across the wreckage, securing the room within seconds. One of them, taller than the others, took a step forward. His rifle was aimed directly at Varric's chest. For the first time in his life, the Admiral felt small. Carter's voice returned through the comms, but this time it was directed at his own soldiers. "Secure the Tyrannus. Take their wounded alive. Kill the rest." Varric exhaled slowly, his grip on the console loosening. His claws retracted, his shoulders squared. He met the faceless gaze of the human soldier standing before him, and for the briefest moment, He saw what no Dominion leader had ever dared to acknowledge. Humanity had never been prey. It had been a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The soldier's weapon hummed. A sharp, precise burst of plasma shot forward. Varric did not feel himself fall. Across the galaxy, the Dominion crumbled. The High Council's palace, once the symbol of absolute power, lay in ruins as human warships circled overhead. Cities that had stood for thousands of years burned, their streets flooded with civilians scrambling for safety that no longer existed. Planetary governors surrendered in droves, hoping to save what little remained of their populations. But there was no mercy. Humanity's forces did not conquer the Dominion. They erased it. System by system, world by world, the Empire was dismantled, its infrastructure torn apart, its military reduced to scattered remnants too weak to retaliate. Those who had once ruled from the safety of their gilded halls were dragged into the streets, forced to witness the execution of their leaders. Broadcasts spread across every surviving Dominion colony, carrying a single message. There will be no peace. There will be no surrender. The Dominion is dead. Humanity rules now. And at the center of it all, General Elias Carter watched from his command ship, his face unreadable. He had seen wars before, but none like this. He had given humanity the revenge it craved, but he knew that it had come at a price. They were no longer the victims of the galaxy. They were its new masters. And the galaxy would never forget the day humanity stopped running. It would never forget the day humanity became the monsters it once feared.